The air reeked of gunpowder and blood. Through the haze of battle smoke, Thomas Blackwood adjusted his position behind the Confederate earthworks, his rifle steady against his shoulder. June 1864, Cold Harbor, Virginia. The morning sun already blazed too hot for May, turning the battlefield into a cauldron of sweat and death. "Long shot," whispered Robert Hayes beside him, using the nickname that had followed Thomas from their days at university to the blood-soaked fields of war. "Think we'll make it out of this one?" Thomas didn't answer. He'd stopped making predictions around the same time he'd stopped counting the men he'd killed. As the regiment's most accurate marksman, that number had grown higher than he cared to remember. Robert pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket, a letter edges soft from countless readings. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the handwriting remained clear, delicate, feminine curves that seemed impossibly out of place amidst the brutality surrounding them. "When this is over," Robert said, eyes fixed on the letter, "I'm going to Texas, going to find her." Thomas glanced at his friend. "The letter girl, Catherine Rayner." Robert's voice softened on her name. "She writes like someone worth living for." Thomas had heard the letters many times, Robert reading them aloud during quiet moments between battles. Letters responding to soldiers' requests for correspondence, offering words of hope from the home front. Robert had responded once on a whim, never expecting a reply. But Catherine had written back, and again and again. A distant bugle call pierced the relative quiet. The Union forces were preparing to advance. "Best get ready," Thomas said, adjusting his scope. Robert carefully refolded the letter, tucking it back into his pocket. "If I don't make it through today, don't," Thomas cut him off. "No, listen. If I don't, I want you to find her. Tell her." Robert paused, searching for words. "Tell her I was a better man because of her letters." Before Thomas could reply, the world erupted. Union artillery opened fire shells screaming overhead. One hit too close, sending splintered wood and earth in a deadly spray. Thomas felt the impact more than heard it, his ears ringing as he was thrown back. When he regained his senses, seconds later, Robert lay beside him, blood spreading across his chest, eyes wide with shock. "No, no, no," Thomas scrambled to his friend, pressing his hands against the wound. "Hold on, Rob." Robert's trembling hand reached for his pocket, pulling out the blood-spattered letter. "Promise me," he gasped, pressing the paper into Thomas's palm. "Find her." Before Thomas could answer, Robert's eyes fixed on something distant, something Thomas couldn't see. His body went slack. "I promise," Thomas whispered, though he knew his friend could no longer hear him. Another shell hit nearby. This time, darkness claimed Thomas too. 5 years later, spring 1869, the sun beat down mercilessly on the Texas plains, turning the world into a canvas of golden brown. Catherine Kate Rayner stood before her father's grave, the freshly turned earth, a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. 6 months gone, and still the pain felt raw. She clutched a letter in her hand, not one of comfort, but of business. The Stillwater Bank's latest warning: 6 months to repay the loan or lose the ranch. The same ranch her father had poured his life into. The same ranch she had promised to protect. "I don't know how to fix this, Pa," she whispered, the wind catching her words and carrying them across the open field. Her fingers traced the simple wooden marker. No elaborate headstone that would come later, if there was a later, for the Rayner Ranch. From the porch of the weathered farmhouse, Martha Rayner watched her daughter with tired eyes. The stroke had come 3 months after her husband's passing, as if grief itself had dealt the physical blow. Now confined to a wheelchair, the once vibrant woman could only observe as her daughter shouldered burdens never meant for someone so young. Kate made her way back to the house boots, kicking up dust from earth that had seen too little rain. The ranch was dying a slow death, fences broken, crops withering, cattle thin. Each day brought a new challenge, a new reminder of how precarious their situation had become. "Another letter?" Martha asked as Kate approached her speech, slightly slurred from the stroke. Kate nodded, tucking the paper into her pocket. No need to burden her mother with more worry. "Just bank business. Nothing we can't handle." Martha's knowing look said she wasn't fooled, but she didn't press. "Samuel is coming by this afternoon." Dr. Samuel Wilson had been their family physician for as long as Kate could remember. More than that, he'd been her father's closest friend. Since his death, the doctor had become their most steadfast ally, checking on Martha's health and offering what help he could. True to his word, Dr. Wilson's buggy appeared on the horizon just as the afternoon heat reached its peak. Kate watched him approach from the kitchen window, where she stood kneading dough with more force than necessary. Each push and fold helped release a fraction of her frustration. "Catherine," Wilson greeted, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. At 65, his hair had gone completely white, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. "Martha." "Samuel." Martha smiled, some animation returning to her face. "Coffee? Please." He settled into a chair at the kitchen table, watching as Kate set aside her dough and moved to the stove. "How are things?" The question carried weight, and Kate felt her shoulders tense. "We're managing." "The bank." Kate's silence was answer enough. Wilson sighed, accepting the cup she offered. "I've been thinking about your situation." "We don't need charity, Dr. Wilson." "Not offering any." He took a careful sip. "But you need help, Kate, real help. The kind that comes with strong backs and calloused hands." Kate leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Hired hands cost money. Money we don't have." "Not hired hands." Wilson set down his cup, meeting her gaze steadily. "A husband." The word hung in the air between them. Kate's first instinct was to laugh, but something in Wilson's expression stopped her. "I'm serious," he continued. "There are good men looking for a fresh start after the war. Men with farming experience who need land more than they need romance. You're suggesting I marry a strange to save the ranch." Kate's voice held more disbelief than anger. "I'm suggesting a practical arrangement. Women do it all the time out west." Martha, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "He's not wrong, Kate." Kate looked between them, these two people she trusted most in the world, suggesting she bind her life to a complete stranger. "I need to think," she said, finally retreating to her father's study. The small room remained exactly as he'd left it. Books lining the walls, maps of the ranch, spread across the desk. His reading glasses, perched atop ledgers, filled with his neat handwriting. Kate ran her fingers over the familiar objects, seeking comfort in their permanence. Her eyes fell on a small photograph tucked into the corner of the desk's leather blotter. Her father, much younger, standing proud in a Union uniform. A secret they'd kept in Texas, firmly Confederate territory. He'd fought for what he believed was right, even when it made him an outsider in his own home. "What would you do, Pa?" she whispered. As if in answer, her gaze landed on a newspaper folded open to advertisements. Columns of text from men seeking wives, women seeking husbands, souls reaching out across distances, hoping to find connection, or at least companionship. Kate sank into her father's chair, an idea forming. A desperate idea, perhaps, but desperate times left little room for conventional thinking. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer and picked up her father's pen. That night, Kate opened the small rosewood box she kept beneath her bed. Inside lay a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon letters she'd written years ago to a soldier she'd never met. Letters she'd never sent. The first dated 1863, addressed to James Rayner, her brother, who had left in the night to join the Union Army against their mother's desperate pleas. Their father had supported his decision quietly, but in Texas, loyalty to the Confederacy was expected. James's choice had been dangerous for the whole family. Kate had written faithfully, pouring her heart onto paper, never knowing if her words reached him. Then the letters started returning unopened. No explanation, no body to bury, just the silent implication of death. The last letter she'd written to him remained sealed. She'd never had the courage to open it after it returned, marked simply "deceased." Beneath the stack was another letter, this one blood-stained at the edges. It had arrived nearly a year after James was presumed dead, addressed in an unfamiliar hand. She'd never opened this one, either too afraid of what final words about her brother it might contain. Kate set the box aside and returned to her desk, where her newly drafted advertisement waited. Rereading it by lamplight, she wondered if she was making another mistake. Ranch owner, female 25, seeks husband. Not for romance, but partnership. Property in need of restoration, hard work required. Loyalty and sobriety essential. Beauty not required, strength of character is. Direct. Honest. Perhaps too honest, but Kate had no patience for pretense. She would send it to the Dallas newspaper tomorrow. She signed her name at the bottom of the page, wondering what kind of man would respond to such an advertisement, and whether she was strong enough to bind her life to a stranger for the sake of a promise to her father. 2 months passed. Spring settled more firmly over the land, bringing wildflowers and the promise of renewal. Kate received 3 responses to her advertisement. 2 she dismissed immediately, one from a man clearly more interested in acquiring land than working at another whose poor grammar and boastful tone set off warning bells. The third letter was different. Simple, straightforward handwriting. No flourishes, no elaborate promises. Just a man who described himself as familiar with ranching, willing to work, and looking for a place to belong after years of wandering. Miss Rayner, I have experience with cattle and crops. I drink rarely and never to excess. I can repair most anything broken and am not afraid of long hours. I seek no romance, only purpose. If your offer still stands, I will arrive on the April 15th train to Stillwater. Respectfully, Jonathan Blackwood. Kate read the letter so many times she nearly memorized it. Something in its sparse honesty resonated with her. After discussing it with her mother and Dr. Wilson, she sent a brief reply confirming the arrangement. Now standing on the Stillwater train platform, in her best dress, practical navy blue, worn but well-kept, Kate felt her stomach twist with nervous anticipation. The train whistle sounded in the distance, a shrill announcement that her future approached. "You don't have to go through with this," Dr. Wilson said quietly beside her. He had insisted on accompanying her to the station. "If you don't like the look of him, we'll find another way." Kate straightened her shoulders. "I gave my word." The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Passengers began to disembark, a young couple, an older gentleman, a woman with 2 small children. Kate scanned each face, wondering which would belong to her future husband. Then she saw him and her heart sank. He was tall, that much was true, but so thin he appeared almost gaunt. His coat hung from his frame like a scarecrow's, worn at the elbows and missing a button. His boots were scuffed and split at the seams. A single canvas bag hung from one shoulder, apparently all he owned in the world. But it was his eyes that truly gave her pause. Deep set beneath a strong brow, they held none of the warmth or eagerness she might have expected. Instead, they surveyed the platform with the wariness of a man who had learned to expect danger from every quarter. When they finally landed on her, she felt a chill, despite the warm day. Whispers rippled through the gathered townspeople. Kate heard a woman murmur to her friend, "That's what she wrote for." Another voice more carrying, "Looks like he crawled out of a grave." The man approached his stride steady despite his lean frame. Up close, she could see his face bore the weathered lines of someone older than his probable years. A thin scar traced from his left temple to his cheekbone. "Catherine Rayner," his voice was low, roughened like stone over stone. Kate nodded, acutely aware of the watching crowd. "Mr. Blackwood, Jonathan." He offered no smile, no handshake, just a slight incline of his head. From the saloon across the street, a figure appeared in the doorway. Colonel Gregory Reed, the recently appointed bank manager who had taken over the Rayner loan from the previous owner, a former Union officer who'd moved to Texas after the war, bringing northern money and eastern manners to the frontier town. Reed's eyes narrowed as he spotted Jonathan, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Impossible," he muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Jonathan stiffened almost imperceptibly, but his face betrayed nothing as he turned back to Kate. "Your wagon. This way." Kate led him toward the buckboard, acutely conscious of Reed's gaze following them. Wilson walked behind his presence, a reassuring buffer against the curious stares of the townspeople. The ride back to the ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. Jonathan sat beside Kate on the wagon seat, his posture rigid, eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if expecting an ambush. Dr. Wilson had offered to accompany them, but Kate had declined. Better to face this new reality without an audience. "The property is 5 miles out," Kate said, finally unable to bear the silence any longer. 200 acres, though, only about 60 are currently workable." Jonathan nodded but offered no response. "There's a creek that runs along the western border. Doesn't dry up even in summer." Another nod. Kate felt irritation rising. Was this how it would be, living with a mute who communicated in head movements? "Do you speak Mr. Blackwood? Or should I learn to interpret different varieties of nods?" For the first time, something flickered in his expression, the ghost of what might have been amusement. "I speak when there's something worth saying." The ranch came into view, a modest 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, a large barn in need of repair, a chicken coop, and various outbuildings. Once it had been one of the finest properties in the county. Now even Kate had to admit it looked like a grand lady fallen on hard times. It needs work, she said unnecessarily. Most things worth having do. It was the longest sentence he'd offered since his arrival. Martha waited on the porch, her wheelchair positioned to catch the afternoon sun. Her expression as they approached shifted from anticipation to carefully masked disappointment. Kate couldn't blame her. Jonathan Blackwood hardly inspired confidence at first glance. "Mother, this is Mr. Blackwood," Kate said as they reached the house. "Mr. Blackwood, my mother, Martha Rayner." Jonathan removed his worn hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "Ma'am, welcome to our home," Martha said, her voice warm despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "You've had a long journey. You must be hungry." "The bunkhouse is this way," Kate interjected, not ready to invite the stranger into their home just yet. "You can get settled while I prepare something to eat." She led him to a small structure about 50 yards from the main house. Once housing for ranch hands, it had stood empty since the war took most of the men and finances took the rest. Kate had spent the last week cleaning it, making sure the single bed had fresh linens and the small stove would provide adequate heat. "It's not much," she said, pushing open the door, "but it's private." Jonathan stepped inside, surveying the sparse accommodations with an inscrutable expression. "It's more than enough." Kate hovered in the doorway, suddenly unsure. This man was now, at least in theory, her fiancé. What exactly was the protocol for such an arrangement? "I'll bring some food out shortly. You can rest if you'd like." Jonathan set his bag on the bed. "I prefer to see the property." "Now," Kate blinked, "but you've just arrived." "Daylight's burning." He moved past her into the yard. "Show me what needs doing first." Kate stared after him, caught between irritation and reluctant respect. At least he was eager to work. That was something, wasn't it? She spent the next hour leading him around the ranch, pointing out broken fences, the leaking barn roof, fields that needed plowing. Jonathan listened silently, occasionally kneeling to examine the soil or test the sturdiness of a fence post. His assessment was methodical, professional. Not once did he comment on the overwhelming nature of the tasks ahead. "The cattle are mostly over in the north pasture," Kate explained as they neared the barn. "We're down to 30 head from over 100 before the war. Quality decent. Father always bred for hardiness over size." Jonathan nodded approvingly. "Smart in this climate." As the tour concluded, they stood before the house once more. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the weathered wood in golden hues that disguised its state of disrepair. "Why did you answer my letter?" Kate asked suddenly. The question had been burning inside her since she'd first spotted him on the platform. Jonathan was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "You wrote like someone who would not give up." He paused. "I thought perhaps you could teach me how that's done." Before Kate could respond to this unexpected revelation, Martha called from the porch. "Supper's ready." Jonathan hesitated, clearly uncertain whether the invitation extended to him. "You might as well eat with us," Kate said. "We should discuss the arrangements." Over a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork, Kate outlined her expectations. Jonathan would work the ranch, help restore it to productivity, and in exchange would eventually share ownership once they married. "When would that be?" Martha asked, looking between them. Kate glanced at Jonathan, who seemed more interested in his plate than the conversation. "I thought perhaps a month, time enough to be sure this arrangement will work for both of us." Jonathan looked up, meeting her gaze with those unsettling eyes. "Sensible." After supper, he excused himself to the bunkhouse. Kate watched from the window as he settled on the small porch step, his figure a dark silhouette against the deepening twilight. He sat motionless, staring at the star-filled sky, one hand closed around something she couldn't see. "He's not what I expected," Martha said quietly from behind her. Kate turned away from the window. "No, there's something haunted about him." "Shaw, it's the war, Mother. It changed everyone it touched." Martha's expression softened. "Like your father, like James." Kate felt the familiar ache at the mention of her brother. "Yes." "Will you go through with it?" Kate looked back toward the bunkhouse where Jonathan still sat, a solitary figure against the vastness of the Texas night. "I don't know, but we need help, and he needs something." Later that night, unable to sleep, Kate found herself drawn back to the window. Jonathan remained on the step, seemingly unmoved for hours. What kind of man sits alone in the dark for so long? What ghosts keep him company? As if sensing her gaze, he suddenly looked up toward her window. Kate stepped back, heart pounding irrationally. When she gathered the courage to look again, he was gone, the bunkhouse door closed against the night. For the next week, Jonathan worked from dawn until dusk. Kate would wake to find him already in the fields and often had to insist he stop when darkness made work impossible. He spoke little, ate quickly, and kept to himself when not working. But the results were undeniable. Fences that had sagged for years stood straight again. The barn roof no longer leaked. The chicken coop had been reinforced against predators, and the vegetable garden expanded. Kate watched him from the kitchen window as he split logs with mechanical precision. Each swing of the axe revealed the lean strength hidden beneath his worn clothing. He wasn't the hulking farmhand she'd imagined responding to her advertisement, but his endurance was remarkable. He works harder than two men, Martha observed, wheeling herself beside Kate. Though he talks less than half of one, Kate smiled despite herself. He's effective. But I know nothing about him. Where he's from, what he did before or during the war, why he answered my advertisement? Nothing. Martha patted her daughter's hand. Some men carry wounds that don't show, Kate. Give him time. Time was something Kate wasn't sure they had. Colonel Reed had made it clear during his last visit that the bank's patience was running thin. 6 months had seemed generous when he'd first mentioned, but already one had passed with little financial improvement to show. That evening, as Jonathan returned his tools to the barn, Kate approached him with a plate of food. I thought you might be hungry. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, settling on a hay bale to eat. Kate remained determined to breach the wall of silence between them. The fence in the north pasture looks good. You work fast. Had practice. He took another bite. Where before? Coming here, I mean. Jonathan chewed slowly, his expression closing like a door. Different places. That's not much of an answer, Mr. Blackwood. Jonathan. Jonathan, then. Kate crossed her arms. We're meant to be married in less than a month. Don't you think I deserve to know something about the man I'll be binding my life to? He set down his fork, meeting her gaze directly. What do you want to know? Where are you from? What did you do during the war? Why are you alone? Why did you really answer my advertisement? The questions tumbled out in a rush. Virginia originally, fought for the Confederacy. Most of my people are dead. He answered mechanically as if reciting facts about a stranger. As for why I came, his voice trailed off, something unreadable crossing his features. Everyone needs somewhere to belong. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd offered before. Kate decided to press her advantage. Were you at Cold Harbor? My brother mentioned it in his letters. She couldn't finish the sentence. A shadow passed over Jonathan's face. Yes. James, my brother, joined the Union Army. We didn't know what happened to him. Just that he died somewhere. Kate hadn't meant to share this, but something in Jonathan's expression encouraged her to continue. Father supported the Union quietly. Dangerous in Texas. Jonathan studied her for a long moment. Your brother, what was his full name? James Rayner. Why? He shook his head slightly. Common name. Thought I might have known him. Kate doubted this. A Confederate soldier crossing paths with her Union brother seemed unlikely, but she appreciated the gesture. Thank you for the fence, she said, preparing to leave him to his meal. Catherine, his voice stopped her. I'm not good with words, but I'm good with my hands. I'll earn my keep here. It was, she realized, his way of offering reassurance. I believe you will. That night, as Jonathan slept in the bunkhouse, Kate found herself drawn to his solitary bag. He'd been here a week, yet never fully unpacked, as if prepared to leave at a moment's notice. What few possessions he owned might offer insights into the man himself. She hesitated at the door, conscience warring with curiosity. This was an invasion of privacy, something her father would have frowned upon. But this man was meant to become her husband, and his reticence left her few alternatives. The bag sat at the foot of the neatly made bed. Jonathan himself lay atop the covers, fully clothed, except for his boots, one arm thrown across his eyes. His breathing was deep and regular, but Kate noticed how his body remained tense even in sleep, as if perpetually on alert. Moving with exquisite care, she knelt beside the bag. It wasn't locked, just secured with a simple leather strap. Inside, she found few personal items, a spare shirt mended but clean, a straight razor and strop, a small leather-bound book that proved to be a Bible, its pages marked with pressed leaves, a battered tin cup. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a wooden box carved with the initials RH. Kate's heart raced as she carefully unwrapped it. The box itself was beautifully made, clearly a prized possession. She hesitated before opening it, knowing she was crossing a line. Inside, she found letters, her letters, every advertisement she'd sent, every response carefully preserved. Some showed water damage, others had been mended with careful stitches. But most surprising were the notations in the margins. Responses never sent written in a precise hand, nothing like the one from the letter she'd received. On one dated just after she'd accepted his offer to come to Texas, "She deserves better than a ghost, but I made a promise." On another, day 45 without food, her letter came. Perhaps a sign. Kate's hands trembled as she sorted through them. At the bottom of the box lay a small leather journal. Opening it revealed a different handwriting, entirely looser, more flowing, and a name, Robert Hayes. The final entry read, "If I don't make it, Blackwood will find you. Trust him as I have. He's a better man than he believes." Kate nearly dropped the journal when Jonathan suddenly spoke from the bed. "Find what you're looking for." She whirled, heart pounding, to find him watching her with unreadable eyes. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, but the quiet disappointment there was worse than any anger. "I'm sorry," she stammered, clutching the journal. "I shouldn't have." "No," he agreed, sitting up slowly. "You shouldn't have." "These letters," Kate said, unable to stop now that she'd begun. "They're mine, but that's not your handwriting on the responses. And this journal belongs to someone named Robert Hayes." She held it up accusingly. "Who are you really, Jonathan Blackwood?" He stood, moving to the window to look out at the night sky. For a long moment he said nothing, and Kate feared he would retreat back into silence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of long-buried truth. "Robert Hayes was my friend. We fought together at Cold Harbor." He turned to face her, his expression raw in a way she hadn't seen before. "He had your letters, read them to me sometimes, said they gave him hope. But you're the one who answered my advertisement," Kate said, confusion evident in her voice. "Yes." While Jonathan moved closer gently, taking the journal from her hands and running his thumb over the worn leather. "Because I promised him I would find you." "I don't understand." "Robert died at Cold Harbor. In my arms." The words came slowly, as if each one had to be pried loose. "His last request was that I find the woman whose letters had kept him going through the worst of the war." Kate sank onto the edge of the bed, the implications washing over her. "So everything coming here, agreeing to marry me, it was all because of a promise to a dead man?" "Not entirely." Jonathan's gaze held hers steadily. "Your words, even filtered through Robert, they reached something in me I thought was dead. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like fate. But you let me believe you were the one who'd written to me." "I never claimed to be." A shadow passed over his features. "I should have been clearer. I'm sorry for that." Kate looked down at the box of letters, feeling strangely betrayed. "I don't even know who you are." "I'm the man standing before you now." Jonathan knelt to gather the scattered letters, carefully returning them to the box. "The past can't be changed, Catherine. I came here to help you save this ranch, and I intend to honor that commitment." "Why did you keep all these?" she asked, gesturing to the letters. A long pause. "Because they were the only beautiful things left in my world." The raw honesty in his voice struck her more powerfully than any elaborate explanation could have. Here was a man who had lost everything, even his identity, in some ways clinging to borrowed hope found in letters meant for another. "I should go," Kate said, rising unsteadily to her feet. Jonathan nodded, but as she reached the door, he spoke again. "For what it's worth, I've been more honest with you than with anyone in years." Kate paused, hand on the doorframe. "That's not saying much, is it?" His soft, humorless laugh followed her into the night. Back in the safety of her room, Kate sat on her bed, mind reeling. The man she'd invited into her life, her home, her future, was essentially a stranger carrying out a dead friend's last wish. Yet something about his revelation felt strangely like progress. The first crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable. She remembered the notes in the margins of her letters. Not the words of a cold, calculating deceiver, but of a broken man finding slender threads of meaning to hold on to. Was that any worse a foundation for marriage than so many others built on convenience or necessity? Outside her window, the Texas night spread vast and star-filled. Somewhere in that darkness, Jonathan Blackwood kept his own counsel, a man defined by promises, one to a dead friend and now one to her. Only time would tell if either could be fully kept. Dawn broke over the Rayner Ranch in watercolor strokes of pink and gold. Jonathan stood at the edge of the north pasture, watching as the first light touched the tall grass, turning dewdrops into diamonds. In these early morning moments before the weight of the day settled on his shoulders, he could almost remember the man he'd been before the war. A professor of history, a man of books and ideas, a man who believed in something. The confession to Catherine the night before had left him feeling strangely hollowed out, as if speaking those long-buried truths had carved something from inside him. He hadn't meant to reveal so much, hadn't meant to tell her about Robert, about the promise, but seeing her there holding the tangible evidence of his deception had broken something loose. Now he wondered if she would ask him to leave. It would be her right. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to find Catherine walking toward him, her hair loose around her shoulders, not yet pinned up for the day. In the soft morning light, she looked younger, the worry lines around her eyes less pronounced. "You're up early," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Always am." He turned back to the pasture. Sun's wasting otherwise. Catherine moved to stand beside him, arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill. For a long moment they stood in silence, watching as the light spread across the land. "I've been thinking about what you told me," she said finally. Jonathan tensed, waiting for the dismissal. "I don't like being deceived." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "But I understand why you weren't entirely forthcoming." He glanced at her, surprised. "You do. We all carry things we'd rather not speak of." She met his gaze directly. "I still need help with this ranch. You still need whatever it is you came here seeking. The arrangement can stand if you're willing." Relief washed through him, unexpected in its intensity. "I am." "Good." She nodded, once businesslike. "The cattle need moving to the east pasture today. The grass there is better." Just like that, she was moving on. No further questions about Robert, about the letters, about his past. Jonathan watched her walk back toward the house, her back straight, shoulders squared. Catherine Rayner was unlike any woman he had ever known. The day unfolded like many before it, hard work under the Texas sun, the rhythmic pattern of physical labor that had become Jonathan's anchor in a world that no longer made sense. He moved the cattle with methodical precision, noting which animals seemed healthy and which might need attention. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a spring storm. Jonathan quickened his pace, wanting to finish repairs on the chicken coop before the rain came. As he worked, he became aware of being watched. Martha Rayner sat in her wheelchair at the edge of the yard, a shawl around her shoulders despite the warm day. Her eyes, so like her daughter's, followed his movements with quiet assessment. "Mrs. Rayner," he acknowledged, setting down his hammer. "Can I help you with something?" "Just getting some air." Her voice carried the slight slur from her stroke, but her mind remained sharp. "Catherine tells me you knew someone who received her letters during the war." Jonathan tensed. "Yes, ma'am." "She writes well, my daughter, always has." Martha's fingers plucked absently at her shawl. "Her father encouraged it. Said words were just as important as actions in their own way." Jonathan wasn't sure how to respond, so he simply nodded. "You don't say much, do you, Mr. Blackwood?" "Not much worth saying, ma'am." A small smile touched Martha's lips. "My husband was like that when he came back from the Mexican War. Like he'd used up all his words and needed to grow more." Her eyes, shrewd and penetrating, studied his face. "The war changed you too, I think." "Wars change everyone who fight them." Jonathan picked up his hammer again, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "Yes, but some men come back carrying more than others." Martha's gaze drifted to the horizon where the storm clouds continued to gather. "My son James went north to fight for the Union. Did Catherine tell you?" "She mentioned him." "We never got his body back. Never knew exactly what happened to him." Pain flashed across her features. Just a letter saying he was dead. No details. No comfort. Jonathan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Thank you." Martha's attention returned to him. Catherine needs someone steady, Mr. Blackwood. Someone who will stand beside her, not in front of her. She began to wheel herself back toward the house. I hope you can be that man, whatever name you're using these days. Jonathan froze hammer halfway to a nail. Ma'am? Martha paused, looking back over her shoulder. I may be in this chair, Mr. Blackwood, but my eyes and ears work just fine. You're not the first man to come home from war with a new name. With that, she continued toward the house, leaving Jonathan staring after her. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Jonathan secured the last board on the chicken coop. By the time he reached the porch of the main house, the sky had opened up completely, turning the yard into a maze of puddles. Catherine met him at the door with a towel. You're soaked, she said, handing it to him. Come in before you catch your death. The kitchen was warm, the scent of baking bread filling the air. Martha sat at the table, a cup of tea before her. She gave Jonathan a small nod, but said nothing about their earlier conversation. Storm came faster than I expected, Jonathan said, drying his hair with the towel. Spring storms are like that here, Catherine replied, returning to the stove where a pot of something savory simmered. Quick to form, quick to pass, she glanced out the window at the driving rain. Usually, thunder cracked overhead, making the windows rattle. Martha jumped slightly, her hand going to her throat. Just thunder, Mother, Catherine soothed, moving to her side. I know. Martha's voice was faint. Just startled me. Jonathan recognized the signs, the too rapid breathing, the widened eyes. He'd seen it in soldiers after battle, the way ordinary sounds could suddenly transport them back to moments of terror. Without thinking, he pulled out the chair across from Martha and sat down. When I first came back, he said quietly, every loud noise felt like artillery fire. Both women looked at him in surprise, unaccustomed to him initiating conversation. My hands would shake, he continued, demonstrating with a slight tremor. Heart would race like a runaway horse. Took nearly a year before I could hear a door slam without diving for cover. Martha's breathing steadied as she focused on his words. How did you manage it? Jonathan considered this. Found patterns, predictable things. Work helps, using your hands, seeing something take shape. He glanced at Catherine, then back to Martha. And finding a purpose bigger than the fear. A small smile touched Martha's lips. Wise words, Mr. Blackwood. Catherine was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, something between surprise and dawning understanding. It made him uncomfortable, this sudden attention, so he rose from the table. Should check on the animals, he muttered, moving toward the door. In this downpour, Catherine's voice stopped him. You just got dry. Rain won't hurt me. He reached for his hat. Stay, Martha said. Please, just until the worst passes. Something in her tone, not pity but simple human connection, made it impossible to refuse. Jonathan hung his hat back on the peg and returned to the table. Catherine served stew and fresh bread, the three of them eating in a silence punctuated by thunder and the drumming of rain on the roof. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but neither was it as strained as previous meals. Something had shifted, though Jonathan couldn't have named what it was. After supper, when the storm had subsided to a gentle patter, Jonathan prepared to return to the bunkhouse. At the door, Catherine stopped him with a hand on his arm, the first time she'd touched him intentionally. Thank you, she said, for what you did for Mother. Jonathan shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Wasn't much. It was exactly what she needed. Catherine's hand fell away. You understand more than you let on, Jonathan Blackwood. She spoke his name with a slight emphasis, as if to say she accepted it regardless of its origins. The simple gesture of acknowledgement affected him more than he would have expected. Good night, Catherine, he said, stepping out into the damp evening. Kate, she called after him. My friends call me Kate. He paused, looking back at her, silhouetted in the doorway. Good night, Kate. 3 days later, Jonathan was repairing a section of fence in the far pasture when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made him look up. A rider approached his horse, moving at a brisk trot despite the muddy ground. As he drew closer, Jonathan recognized him as Dr. Wilson, Catherine's family physician. Jonathan straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers as the older man reined in his horse. Mr. Blackwood, Wilson greeted, dismounting with the ease of a man accustomed to spending hours in the saddle. Thought I might find you out here. Dr. Wilson, Jonathan nodded in greeting. Something wrong at the house? No, just my usual visit to check on Martha. Wilson tied his horse to the fence post. Thought I'd come see how you're settling in before I head back to town. Jonathan returned to his work, sensing the doctor had more to say. Settling fine. Wilson watched him hammer for a moment. You've made good progress around here. Kate seems pleased. Glad to hear it. She's a remarkable young woman. Been through more than most her age. Jonathan glanced up, recognizing the protective tone. She's strong. Yes, Wilson agreed, but strength has its limits. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I've known the Rayners for 20 years, Mr. Blackwood. Delivered Kate and her brother, treated their father's wounds after the Mexican War. I consider them family. Your point, doctor. My point is that I care what happens to them. Wilson's voice hardened slightly. And I make it my business to know who comes into their lives. Jonathan drove another nail into the fence post, with perhaps more force than necessary. You checking up on me? Can you blame me? Wilson pulled a pipe from his pocket, tamping tobacco into the bowl with a practiced thumb. A stranger arrives, answering an advertisement, looking like he's one meal away from starvation, and agrees to marry a woman he's never met. He struck a match, puffing until the tobacco caught. I'd be remiss not to ask questions. Jonathan set down his hammer, turning to face the doctor fully. What do you want to know? For starters, why you're using a dead man's name. The statement hung in the air between them. Jonathan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. What are you talking about? Wilson took a long draw on his pipe, exhaling a cloud of fragrant smoke. Jonathan Blackwood died at Andersonville Prison in 1864. I have a colleague in Virginia who confirmed it. His eyes, shrewd beneath bushy white brows, studied Jonathan's face. So I'll ask again, who are you really? For a moment, Jonathan considered denial. But something in the doctor's steady gaze told him it would be futile. Does Catherine know? No, not yet. Wilson's expression softened slightly. I thought you deserved the chance to explain yourself first. Jonathan leaned against the fence post, suddenly weary beyond words. The name he'd carried for years, borrowed from a man who'd shown him kindness in hell, was no longer his shield. My name is Thomas Blackwood, he said finally. The real Jonathan Blackwood shared a cell with me at Andersonville. When he died, I took his name. Why? Thomas looked out across the pasture, seeing not the Texas landscape, but the mud and filth of the prison camp. Because Thomas Blackwood was a killer, a sniper with 43 confirmed kills. His voice grew distant. They called me Longshot for my accuracy. I was good at death, doctor. Too good. Wilson listened silently, pipe smoke curling around his head like thoughts made visible. When they captured me, I was half dead already. Thomas continued. Jonathan kept me alive. Shared his food, tended my wounds, talked to me when fever took my senses. A bitter smile touched his lips. He was a teacher before the war. Said every life had value, even mine. What happened to him? Dysentery, like so many others. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, the memory still raw after all these years. Before he died, he made me promise to live, to find something worth living for. Said I could use his name if it helped. He looked directly at Wilson. I'm not proud of the deception, but I couldn't be Thomas Blackwood anymore. Wilson studied him for a long moment. And Robert Hayes, how does he fit into this story? Fellow soldier, friend, he died at Cold Harbor, made me promise to find Catherine. Thomas shook his head. Seems my life is just a collection of promises to dead men. And Catherine, is she just another promise to keep? The question struck deeper than Thomas expected. She was, at first. And now Thomas picked up his hammer again, needing the familiar weight in his hand. Now I don't know. She deserves better than a man living on borrowed names and borrowed purpose. Wilson knocked the ashes from his pipe against the fence post. Perhaps. He tucked the pipe back into his pocket. But it seems to me a man trying to honor his promises, however they came to him, might be exactly what she needs right now. Thomas looked up, surprised by the lack of condemnation. I won't tell her, Wilson said, untying his horse. That's for you to do when you're ready. He mounted in one smooth motion. But don't wait too long, Mr. Blackwood, or whatever you call yourself. Secrets have a way of revealing themselves at the worst possible moments. With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and the half-repaired fence. The following Saturday, Catherine announced they needed to go into town for supplies. Thomas, who had avoided Stillwater since his arrival, felt a knot form in his stomach at the prospect. "Is it necessary?" he asked, knowing how it sounded, but unable to help himself. Catherine gave him a curious look. "Unless you plan to fix fences with wishful thinking, we need nails. And salt flour coffee." She listed off several more items. "Mother needs her medicine from Dr. Wilson, too." Thomas nodded, resignation settling over him. "I'll hitch the wagon." The ride to town passed mostly in silence. Thomas kept his eyes on the road, all too aware of Catherine Kate beside him. She'd taken more care with her appearance today, he noticed. Her hair was neatly pinned beneath a simple straw hat, and she wore a dress of faded blue calico rather than her usual practical work clothes. As they approached the outskirts of Stillwater, Thomas felt his shoulders tense. He hadn't been in a proper town since arriving in Texas, preferring the isolation of the ranch and the straightforward problems it presented. "We'll go to the general store first," Kate said as they pulled up to the hitching post on the main street. "Then the apothecary for Mother's medicine." Thomas helped her down from the wagon, acutely conscious of the eyes that followed them. Stillwater wasn't large, perhaps 40 buildings arranged along a main street with a few side roads branching off, but it was Saturday and the boardwalks were busy with ranchers and their families come to town for supplies and socializing. "That's her," he heard a woman whisper as they passed. "The Rayner girl who advertised for a husband." "Poor thing must have been desperate," another replied. "Look what she got." Thomas kept his face impassive, though he felt Kate stiffen beside him. They entered the general store, a bell above the door announcing their arrival. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Miss Rayner," he greeted. Then his eyes fell on Thomas. "And Mr. Blackwood," Kate supplied, "my fiancé." The word sent an unexpected jolt through Thomas. They had discussed marriage as a practical arrangement, but hearing Kate claim him so publicly was different. "Congratulations," the shopkeeper said, though his tone suggested anything but genuine pleasure. "What can I help you with today?" Kate handed over her list, and the man began gathering the items. Thomas wandered to the window, keeping one eye on the street outside. Old habits died hard. "Your mother doing well?" the shopkeeper asked as he measured coffee beans into a paper sack. "As well as can be expected," Kate replied. "The new medicine Dr. Wilson prescribed seems to be helping." "Good, good," the man glanced at Thomas. "And the ranch heard you've been making improvements." "Yes, we have." Kate's voice carried a note of pride. "Jonathan's been a tremendous help." Thomas turned at the sound of his borrowed name, catching the shopkeeper's skeptical expression. Before he could dwell on it, movement across the street caught his eye. A man in a well-tailored suit was watching them through the window of the bank, Colonel Gregory Reed. Thomas moved away from the window, positioning himself behind a display of canned goods. The last person he wanted to encounter was Reed. During the war, the man had been known for his ruthless efficiency, first as a field commander, then as the overseer of prisoner exchanges. If anyone might recognize Thomas Blackwood, the sharpshooter known as Longshot, it would be Reed. "Something wrong?" Kate asked, noticing his change in the position. "No," Thomas lied, "just looking at the tools." Kate studied him for a moment, clearly not believing him, but she didn't press. "We're almost done here, just need to settle the bill." And the shopkeeper tallied their purchases. "That'll be $3.42, Miss Rayner." Thomas saw Kate's slight flinch at the amount. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, he counted out exact change, placing it on the counter. Kate stared at him in surprise. "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted quietly. To the shopkeeper, he added, "We'll need these delivered to our wagon." The man nodded, gathering up the coins. "Right away, Mr. Blackwood." Outside, Kate turned to him. "Where did you get that money?" Thomas kept walking, eyes scanning the street. "Been saving. Army pay odd jobs." "But you arrived with almost nothing." "A man can be poor in possessions, but not in funds." He guided her toward the apothecary, one hand lightly at her elbow. "I've been carrying that money for a long time, waiting for something worth spending it on." Kate's expression softened, but before she could respond, a familiar voice called out from behind them. "Miss Rayner, what a pleasant surprise." Thomas felt Kate tense under his hand. They turned to find Colonel Reed approaching his smile as practiced as a stage actor's. Colonel Reed, Kate acknowledged her tone, cooling noticeably. Good morning. Reed's eyes moved to Thomas, narrowing slightly. And Mr. Blackwood, isn't it? We haven't been formally introduced. He extended his hand. Colonel Gregory Reed, manager of Stillwater Bank. Thomas had no choice but to shake the offered hand, keeping his face carefully neutral. Sir, you've made quite an impression on our little community. Reed continued, his smile not reaching his eyes, arriving on the train with nothing but a satchel and now engaged to one of our most interesting landowners. Is there something you needed, Colonel? Kate interrupted, her patience clearly wearing thin. Just being neighborly, Miss Rayner. Reed's attention remained fixed on Thomas. Though I must say, Mr. Blackwood, you look familiar. Have we met before? Thomas felt a cold sweat break out along his spine. Don't believe so. No, Reed's head tilted slightly. I could swear I've seen you somewhere. Perhaps during the war I served with the Union forces in Virginia. I stayed mostly in Georgia, Thomas lied smoothly. Probably thinking of someone else. Reed studied him for a moment longer, then seemed to dismiss the thought. Must be. Memory plays tricks as one ages. He turned back to Kate. I was actually hoping to speak with you about your loan, Miss Rayner. Perhaps you could stop by the bank before you leave town. Kate's expression tightened. Is there a problem? Not at all, just some paperwork that needs attention. Reed's smile returned all business now. Nothing to worry about. We'll come by after we finish our errands, Kate said, her tone making it clear the conversation was over. Reed tipped his hat. I look forward to it. With a final lingering look at Thomas, he turned and walked back toward the bank. Once he was out of earshot, Kate let out a breath. I don't trust that man. Wise, Thomas muttered, guiding her toward the apothecary once more. The less time we spend with him, the better. At the apothecary, Dr. Wilson was just finishing with another patient. He greeted them warmly, though Thomas noticed the assessing look the doctor gave him, a reminder of their conversation by the fence. Martha's medicine is ready, Wilson said, retrieving a small bottle from a shelf behind the counter. Make sure she takes it morning and night with food. We will, Kate promised, reaching for her purse. Wilson waved her off. Already settled. Your father helped my boy through school. I haven't forgotten. Kate's eyes glistened slightly. Thank you, Samuel. As they prepared to leave, Wilson pulled Thomas aside. A word of caution, he said quietly. Reed's been asking questions about you. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. What kind of questions? Your background, military service. Where you came from. Wilson glanced toward the bank. He seems unusually interested for a simple banker. Appreciate the warning. Wilson nodded. Watch yourself. Reed didn't move to Stillwater by accident. Word is he's looking for something or someone. The doctor's words echoed in Thomas's mind as they crossed the street toward the bank. Reed was waiting for them, all smiles and solicitous attention, as he ushered Kate into his office. Thomas followed every instinct on alert. The office was well appointed with heavy furniture and leather-bound books lining the shelves, all designed to project an image of stability and wealth. Reed settled behind a large desk, gesturing for them to take the chairs opposite. Thank you for coming. He began shuffling through some papers. As I mentioned, there are some matters regarding your loan that require attention. Kate sat straight back, her expression guarded. The terms were clear when you took over the loan, 6 months to repay with the ranch as collateral. Yes, that was the original agreement. Reed selected a document, sliding it across the desk. However, upon further review of the paperwork, I've discovered a special provision that might be of concern. Thomas watched as Kate scanned the document, her face paling. This can't be right, she said, looking up. The loan can be called in at any time at the bank's discretion. That wasn't in the original terms my father signed. Reed spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I'm simply enforcing the contract as written, Miss Rayner. Your father signed it. Let me see, Thomas said, taking the paper from Kate. He studied it carefully, noting the signature at the bottom, a reasonable facsimile of what might have been John Rayner's handwriting, but with subtle inconsistencies. When was this provision added? On Reed's smile tightened. It was always part of the agreement, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps Miss Rayner's father didn't fully explain the terms to her. My father wouldn't have agreed to this. Kate insisted, color returning to her cheeks as anger replaced shock. This gives you the power to take our land whenever you want. A precaution only, Reed assured her. The bank has no immediate plans to call in the loan. I simply wanted you to be aware of all aspects of your agreement with us. He leaned forward, his expression turning sympathetic. Though I must say the ranch's current financial situation is concerning. We're making improvements, Kate countered. The cattle are healthier, the crops will yield more this year. Yes, I'm sure you're doing your best. Reed's dismissive tone made Thomas's hands clench into fists beneath the desk. But let's be practical, Miss Rayner. A woman alone? She's not alone. Thomas interrupted, his voice low, but carrying an edge that made Reed blink. Of course not. My apologies. Reed's gaze moved between them, calculating. Still, the financial realities are challenging. I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't mention that there are other options. Such as, Kate asked warily, I could purchase the property myself. Reed naming a figure slightly above market value. It would clear your debt and leave you with a modest sum to start fresh elsewhere. The ranch isn't for sale, Kate said flatly. Perhaps not today. Reed gathered the papers back into a neat stack. But I encourage you to consider the offer. It's more than generous. We'll manage our own affairs, Thomas said, rising to his feet. If there's nothing else. Reed stood as well, his smile now openly calculating. For now, that's all. But do think about what I've said, Miss Rayner. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Outside, Kate walked swiftly to the wagon, her back rigid with suppressed emotion. Thomas followed, keeping his observations to himself until they were well away from town. He's lying, he said finally, once Stillwater was just a smudge on the horizon behind them. That provision was added after your father signed. Kate glanced at him. How do you know? The signature. The ink is different, slightly darker than the rest. And the handwriting, while close, isn't quite right. Thomas kept his eyes on the road. I've seen forgeries before. Can we prove it? Not easily. It would be your word against his, and he's the bank manager. Kate fell silent, processing this. Why would he do this? What does he want with our land? Don't know, Thomas admitted, but men like Reed don't do anything without purpose. They rode in silence for several minutes, each lost in thought. Finally, Kate spoke again. What did Dr. Wilson say to you at the apothecary? Thomas hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Said Reed's been asking questions about me. What kind of questions? Background, military service. Kate's hands tightened on the reins. He suspects something. Maybe. Does he know you? Her direct gaze demanded honesty. From the war. Thomas stared at the road ahead. If he does, it's not as Jonathan Blackwood. The implication hung between them, acknowledged but not yet directly addressed. Kate didn't push further, and Thomas was grateful for the reprieve. As the ranch came into view, Thomas felt a strange sense of homecoming, an unfamiliar emotion for a man who hadn't had a real home in years. The weathered farmhouse, the barn with its newly repaired roof, the fields beginning to green with spring growth. All of it represented something he'd thought lost to him forever. A place of purpose. Kate reined in the horses at the front of the house. Mother will want to know what Reed said. Thomas nodded, helping her down from the wagon. Tell her, but maybe leave out the part about the forged provision. No need to worry her unnecessarily. Kate studied him for a moment. You think he'll act on it soon? Men like Reed don't make threats they don't intend to follow through on. Then we need to be ready. Kate's expression hardened with determination. We'll increase the pace on the repairs, get the Northfield planted by the end of the week. If we can show enough progress, maybe Dr. Wilson can help us secure a loan from someone else to pay off Reed. Thomas admired her resilience, even as he doubted her plan's feasibility. Reed didn't strike him as a man who would be outmaneuvered so easily, but he nodded agreement. I'll start on the Northfield tomorrow. Kate turned to go inside, then paused. Jonathan? She rarely used his name, making it all the more significant when she did. Thank you for coming with me today, for everything. The simple gratitude offered without reservation, despite all the questions that still hung between them, affected Thomas more deeply than he could have anticipated. For a moment, he couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. Kate, he managed finally, whatever happens, I won't let you lose this place. She held his gaze for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, a softening, a recognition. Then she nodded once and disappeared into the house, leaving Thomas to wonder at the unexpected warmth that had bloomed in his chest at the simple exchange. The days that followed took on a new urgency. Thomas worked longer hours, often by lantern light after the sun had set. Kate matched his pace, her determination a tangible force, as she tackled tasks that would have daunted men twice her size. Martha, sensing the change, though neither Thomas nor Kate had fully explained it, contributed what she could, mending clothes, preparing meals that could be eaten quickly between chores, offering quiet encouragement when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. A week after their visit to town, Thomas was turning the soil in the north field when he spotted a rider approaching. His hand moved instinctively to his hip, where a gun would have been during the war. But he carried no weapon now, a deliberate choice made after Andersonville when he'd sworn never to take another life. As the rider drew closer, Thomas relaxed slightly. It was a young man, perhaps 20, with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. "Hello, the field," the rider called, raising a hand in greeting. Thomas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Help you with something." The young man reined in his horse at the edge of the field, looking for the Rayner place. "This it?" "It is." "Then you must be Blackwood." The rider dismounted, extending his hand. "Michael Hayes, Robert's brother." Thomas froze, the name hitting him like a physical blow. Hayes, Robert's brother. The young man's open face did indeed bear a resemblance to his fallen friend, same red hair, same clear blue eyes, though lacking the weary lines the war had etched around them. "Thomas," he managed, taking the offered hand. "Thomas Blackwood." Michael's eyebrows rose. "Thomas Roberts' letters mentioned a Jonathan." "It's complicated." Thomas gestured toward the house. "You've come a long way. Better come inside." As they walked, Michael spoke of his journey from Virginia, of tracking down the letters Robert had sent home, of piecing together the fragments of his brother's life during the war. "When he died at Cold Harbor, they sent his things home," Michael explained. "Not much his Bible, a few letters, a photograph of our parents, but nothing explaining who Catherine Rayner was or why her letters were so important to him." Thomas listened in silence, memories of Robert surfacing with painful clarity. The way he'd read Kate's letters aloud on quiet nights, voice softening on certain phrases. How he'd carried them close to his heart, as if the very paper could shield him from bullets. At the house, Kate was hanging laundry, her back to them as they approached. She turned at the sound of footsteps, expression curious as she took in the stranger. "Kate?" Thomas said, the name still new on his tongue. "This is Michael Hayes, Robert's brother." Kate's hands stilled on the sheet she was hanging. "Robert, the soldier who received my letters." Michael nodded, removing his hat. "Ma'am, I hope I'm not intruding, but I've been trying to understand." He paused, searching for words. "Robert wrote about you, said your letters kept him going through the worst of the war." Kate's gaze moved to Thomas, questions in her eyes that he couldn't begin to answer. "Please come inside," she said, finally gesturing toward the house. "You must be tired from your journey." In the kitchen, Martha greeted the young man with warm hospitality, insisting he have something to eat and drink before any serious discussion. As she busied herself with coffee and leftover cornbread, an awkward silence fell over the table. "How did you find us?" Kate asked finally. "Wasn't easy," Michael admitted. "I started with the return address on your letters, but that led to an empty lot in Dallas. Then I remembered Robert mentioning Stillwater in one of his letters home. Said it was where you lived. But I never told him that." Kate frowned. "I never gave my exact location." Michael shrugged. He must have found out somehow. He turned to Thomas. "When I got to Stillwater and asked about Catherine Rayner, they told me she lived out at the ranch and had recently acquired a—" He paused, looking embarrassed. "A mail-order husband." Kate flushed slightly. "It's not exactly like that." "Doesn't matter," Michael assured her. "I'm just glad I found you. Both of you." His expression grew more serious. "When they told me your husband's name was Blackwood, I thought it had to be Jonathan, Robert's friend, who survived Cold Harbor. But you're Thomas." Thomas felt Kate's questioning gaze but kept his attention on Michael. "Jonathan was a name I used for a time, after the war." Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. "Ah, many men came home with new names, new lives." "Robert died in my arms," Thomas said quietly. "His last request was that I find Kate, make sure she was taken care of." Michael nodded, a shadow passing over his features. That sounds like him, always thinking of others, even at the end. He turned to Kate. He read your letters to the other men in his unit. Said your words gave them all hope for what might come after the fighting was done. Kate's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'm sorry I never got to meet him. He would have liked you, Michael said with certainty, just as he described strong kind, not afraid to speak your mind. Thomas watched as Kate absorbed this, seeing her in a new light, through Michael's description, through Robert's eyes. For all that he'd carried her letters, read and reread them until the paper grew thin, he realized he'd never fully seen her as Robert had, as her own person separate from his promise or his penance. Martha returned with coffee and food, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Michael's journey news from Virginia, the rebuilding taking place across the South. But Thomas remained preoccupied, aware that Michael's arrival had shifted something fundamental in the delicate balance he'd established with Kate. Later, as the sun began to set, Michael insisted on helping with the evening chores, eager to make himself useful. Thomas showed him the barn, explaining the routine with the horse and cattle. You've done good work here, Michael observed, looking around at the repairs. Robert would be proud. Thomas focused on measuring out feed for the horses, just doing what needs doing. It's more than that. Michael leaned against a stall door. You're honoring your promise to him. That means something. Thomas paused, weighing his next words carefully. There's something you should know about how Robert died. Michael straightened, his expression guarded. The Army just said he was killed in action at Cold Harbor, shot by a Confederate sharpshooter. That's true as far as it goes. Thomas set down the feed bucket. But there's more to it. We were pinned down, Union forces advancing. I was the regiment's best marksman. They called me Longshot. He hesitated, the confession lodged in his throat like a physical thing. Go on, Michael encouraged quietly. I was supposed to cover our position, keep the Union officers down while our men retreated. Thomas's voice grew distant, seeing not the barn, but the smoke-filled battlefield. But I hesitated, just for a second, and in that second, Robert stood up to drag a wounded man to safety. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. He exposed himself. Thomas nodded, the old guilt washing over him. If I'd done my job, kept firing, the Union officer who shot him might have kept his head down. He met Michael's gaze directly. In a way, I'm responsible for his death. He expected anger, accusation. Instead, Michael's expression held only sadness. War makes us all responsible in ways we never wanted to be. He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Robert made his choice, just as you've made yours since then. The simple absolution offered without reservation left Thomas momentarily speechless. He'd carried the weight of that moment for so long, the burden of his hesitation, his failure. Thank you, he managed finally. Michael squeezed his shoulder once, then let his hand drop. Now let's finish these chores. I'm starving, and Miss Rayner mentioned something about apple pie for dessert. As they worked side by side in the gathering dusk, Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. A knot of guilt and grief that had been wound so tight for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Michael's presence, his easy acceptance, offered a glimpse of what forgiveness might feel like. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself to consider a future not defined by penance or promises to the dead, but by the living who now surrounded him, by the ranch that needed his hands, by Kate, whose quiet strength had begun to awaken something he'd thought long buried, and by the possibility, slim but real, that he might yet find a way to be worthy of it all. The golden light of early morning filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn wooden table. Thomas sat with a steaming cup of coffee, watching as Kate moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing breakfast. Michael, who had stayed the night in the bunkhouse with Thomas, was outside feeding the horses. Martha had not yet risen. In the quiet morning stillness, Thomas found himself studying Kate, the purposeful movements of her hands, the way sunlight caught in her hair, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. She had become familiar to him in ways he hadn't anticipated when he'd first stepped off that train. You're staring, Kate said without turning around. Thomas smiled faintly. Just thinking. About how different things are than I expected. She glanced over her shoulder, a question in her eyes. Different how? Before Thomas could respond, the door opened and Michael entered, bringing with him the fresh scent of morning air and hay. Horses are fed, he announced, hanging his hat on a peg. That new mare is skittish, though. She'll settle, Thomas said, grateful for the interruption. He wasn't entirely sure what he would have said to Kate, how he might have explained the unexpected warmth that had taken root inside him. Michael joined them at the table as Kate served a simple breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and bacon. The young man had integrated himself seamlessly into their routine over the past week, his cheerful nature and willingness to work long hours making him a welcome addition. "I was thinking," Michael said, reaching for a biscuit, "about that north field. If we plant corn instead of wheat, we might get a better yield given the soil conditions." Thomas nodded. "Been considering that. Soil's a bit rocky for wheat. Corn needs more water," Kate pointed out. "With the creek running low, we could dig an irrigation channel," Michael suggested. "Wouldn't be too difficult with the three of us working on it." The casual way he included himself in future plans didn't escape Thomas's notice. "Planning to stay a while." Michael's expression turned more serious. "If you'll have me. There's not much waiting for me back in Virginia. Farm's gone, parents passed last winter." He looked between them. "Feels like I could be useful here." Kate smiled warmly. "We'd be glad for the help, Michael." Thomas felt a complicated mix of emotions at this development. On one hand, Michael's presence was undeniably beneficial, another set of strong hands, fresh ideas and a connection to Robert that Thomas valued more than he would have expected. On the other, there was something unsettling about the ease with which the young man had slipped into their lives, forming a bond with Kate that seemed to grow stronger each day. Not jealousy, Thomas told himself, just concern. Kate deserved someone unburdened by the past, someone whose name was truly his own. "Thomas," Kate's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "What do you think about Michael staying?" He nodded once. "Makes sense. Plenty of work to go around." Martha's arrival in her wheelchair, pushed by Kate, shifted the conversation to more immediate concerns. The day's chores, an approaching rainstorm, the need to repair the chicken coop before predators discovered the weakness in its walls. As they finished breakfast, Thomas rose to his feet. "I'll start on that irrigation channel. Sooner we get it dug, sooner we can plant." "I'll join you after I help Mother with her exercises," Kate said. Michael pushed back his chair. "I'll come now. Two of us can make good progress before Kate joins." Outside, the Texas sun already beat down with impressive strength despite the early hour. Thomas led the way to the north field, his mind working through the logistics of the irrigation project. The creek that bordered the western edge of the property would need to be diverted slightly, a channel dug to carry water to the field. "You love her, don't you?" Michael's question, delivered without preamble, stopped Thomas in his tracks. He turned slowly to face the younger man, keeping his expression carefully neutral. "What, Kate?" Michael's direct gaze held no judgment, only curiosity. "You love her?" Thomas resumed, walking uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "She's a remarkable woman." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Thomas reached for the shovels they'd left propped against the fence the previous evening. "Whatever I feel doesn't matter. This arrangement is practical, not romantic." Michael accepted one of the shovels but made no move to begin digging. "Robert used to say that the truest things in life are rarely practical." Thomas felt a pang at the mention of his friend. Robert was an idealist. "Maybe." Michael finally turned his attention to the ground, breaking the soil with the edge of his shovel. But he also had a way of seeing straight to the heart of things. It's why he wrote to Kate in the first place. He recognized something in her letters that spoke to him. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of shovels cutting earth filling the space between them. Thomas found himself thinking about Robert, about the letters, about the strange, winding path that had led him to this place. "I promised to find her," he said finally, "to make sure she was taken care of. That's all." Michael paused, leaning on his shovel. "And now, is that still all it is?" Thomas didn't answer immediately, the question touching something raw and tender within him. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I've been living for the dead for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to live for myself." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. "For what it's worth, I think Robert would want you to try." Before Thomas could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was coming fast up the road toward the ranch, raising a cloud of dust in his wake. "Expecting anyone?" Michael asked, straightening up. Thomas shook his head, already moving toward the house. "Stay here." He covered the distance, quickly arriving at the front yard just as the rider pulled up, a young boy, perhaps 12, mounted on a lathered horse. Thomas recognized him as the son of the telegraph operator in Stillwater. "Mr. Blackwood," the boy called breathless. "Got a message for Miss Rayner. Pa said it's urgent." Kate appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm here, Billy. What is it?" The boy fumbled in his pocket, producing a folded piece of paper. "Telegram came this morning. Pa said to bring it right away." Kate accepted the paper, unfolding it with steady hands. Thomas watched as she read, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock, the color draining from her face. "Kate," he moved closer, concern tightening his chest. "What is it?" She looked up, her eyes wide. "It's from Colonel Reed. He's calling in the loan. We have 48 hours to pay in full or forfeit the ranch." Thomas felt a surge of cold anger. "Let me see." She handed him the telegram, a simple message in stark black type: loan agreement terms, require immediate payment in full. Amount due, $1,247.36. Payment expected within 48 hours, or foreclosure proceedings will commence. Regards, Colon G. Reed, Stillwater Bank. 48 hours, Kate repeated, her voice hollow. "We don't have that kind of money. Not even close." Thomas folded the telegram carefully, his mind racing. "We need to talk to Dr. Wilson. See if he can help us secure a loan from someone else." "On a Sunday," Kate shook her head. "Most folks will be at church. And even if we found him who would lend us that much on such short notice." Thomas had no answer for that. The amount was substantial, far more than most families in the area would have access to, especially after the hardships of the war. "What's happening?" Michael had followed Thomas to the house, concern written across his features. Kate quickly explained the situation. Michael's expression darkened as he listened. "This isn't right," he said when she finished. "He can't just change the terms whenever he wants." "He can if he forged a provision allowing it," Thomas said grimly, "and we have no way to prove the forgery." Martha appeared in the doorway, her wheelchair framed by the entrance. "I heard voices. What's wrong?" Kate moved to her mother's side, her voice gentle as she explained the situation. Martha's face paled, but her expression remained resolute. "We'll find a way," she said firmly. "This land has been in our family for 2 generations. We won't lose it now." Thomas wished he shared her confidence. In his experience, men like Reed rarely failed to get what they wanted, especially when they held all the cards. "Billy," he turned to the boy who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Ride back to town and find Dr. Wilson. Tell him what's happened and ask him to come as soon as he can." The boy nodded, eager to help. "Yes, sir." He remounted his horse and galloped away, disappearing in a cloud of dust. Inside the house, they gathered around the kitchen table, the telegram lying between them like a physical threat. Martha had retrieved the original loan papers from John Rayner's desk, and they pored over them, searching for any clue, any oversight on Reed's part. "The original loan was for 900, Kate said, pointing to the figure. "How did it grow to nearly 103? Interest," Thomas suggested, "or more likely fabricated fees added by Reed." "What does he want with our land?" Martha wondered. "It's good land, yes, but hardly the best in the county." Thomas had been asking himself the same question. Reed was a banker, not a farmer or rancher. His interest in the Rayner property seemed disproportionate to its value. "Maybe it's not about the land itself," Michael suggested. "Maybe it's something on it, or under it." "Oil?" Kate asked, skeptical. "There's never been any sign of that here." "Not oil necessarily," Michael clarified, "but something valuable, something worth forcing you out for." Thomas considered this. Or maybe it's not about the land at all. Maybe it's personal. "Personal how?" Martha asked. Thomas hesitated, not wanting to burden them with his suspicions without proof. "Just a feeling." Kate studied him across the table, her eyes narrowing slightly. She knew he was holding something back, but she didn't press him in front of the others. "Whatever his reasons," she said finally, "we need to focus on finding the money. 48 hours isn't much time." "I have some savings," Michael offered. "Not much, but it's something." "I wouldn't ask that of you," Kate began. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Michael's expression was earnest. "Robert would want me to help." Thomas felt a mixture of gratitude and discomfort at the young man's generosity. "I have money too," he said. "Army pay I never spent. It's not enough to cover everything, but combined with what we can gather elsewhere. We could sell some of the cattle," Kate suggested, though her voice betrayed her reluctance. Not ideal, but in an emergency. No, Thomas shook his head. That's exactly what Reed wants for you to strip your assets in a moment of panic. The cattle are your future income. Selling them now would be short-sighted. Then what do you suggest? Kate's frustration was evident. We can't conjure money from thin air. Before Thomas could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon reached them. Dr. Wilson had arrived, his elderly mare trotting briskly up the drive. They met him on the porch, quickly explaining the situation. Wilson's expression grew increasingly grave as he listened. "Reed's showing his hand earlier than I expected," he said, removing his hat as they moved inside. "Must be getting impatient." "Can you help us?" Kate asked directly. "Is there anyone who might lend us the money?" Wilson sighed heavily. "I've been asking around discreetly since your last visit to town. Most folks who have that kind of money either can't spare it or are too afraid of crossing Reed." He paused. "There might be one option, though. Judge Parker in Austin. He's an old friend of your father's. Might be willing to help for John's sake." "Austin is 3 days' ride," Thomas pointed out. "We don't have that kind of time." "We could telegraph him," Kate suggested. Wilson shook his head. "The judge doesn't trust telegrams for financial matters. Too much potential for interception or fraud." A heavy silence fell over the room as they absorbed this setback. Thomas felt the weight of their collective worry, the growing sense that they were running out of options. "There's something else we could try," he said slowly, an idea taking shape. "But it's risky." All eyes turned to him. "Reed's hiding something," Thomas continued. "His interest in this property isn't normal. If we could figure out what he's really after, we might have leverage." "You mean blackmail?" Kate asked, sounding scandalized. "Not blackmail. Negotiation." Thomas looked around the table. "If Reed has a thing to hide and we discover it, he might be more willing to extend the loan terms." "That's still a big if," Wilson pointed out. "And we'd need to find this hypothetical secret within the next 2 days." "I think I might know where to start looking," Thomas said. "Reed recognized me when I arrived. He was stationed in Virginia during the war, overseeing prisoner exchanges and later prison camps." Understanding dawned in Wilson's eyes. "You think this is about you, about who you were during the war?" Thomas nodded grimly. "I was a sharpshooter for the Confederacy. They called me long shot. I had a reputation." Kate's expression registered shock, then a dawning comprehension. "You killed Union officers?" "Yes." Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. 43 confirmed, probably more. Martha's hand moved to her throat. "Oh my." "It was war," Michael said quietly. "Men did what they had to." Thomas appreciated the support, but he knew the stark number spoke for itself. He had been a killer, methodical and efficient. "What does this have to do with Reed?" Kate asked, bringing them back to the immediate problem. "I'm not sure yet," Thomas admitted, "but his reaction when he saw me, it was personal. Like he recognized me specifically, not just as someone from the war." Wilson stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Reed lost a brother at Cold Harbor, a major in the Union Army. Could there be a connection?" Thomas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What was his name, the brother?" "Charles, I believe." "Charles Reed." The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. Major Charles Reed, his 43rd kill, the last life he had taken before being captured. "I shot him, Thomas said, his voice hollow. 1,000 yards, through heavy fog. They said it was impossible." A stunned silence followed this revelation. Kate stared at him, her expression unreadable. Martha closed her eyes briefly as if in prayer. Michael looked grim, but unsurprised, as if he had suspected something of this nature all along. "Well, thou," Aunt Wilson said finally, "that certainly explains Reed's interest in you, but it doesn't tell us why he wants the Rayner property." "Maybe it's just revenge," Kate suggested. "Using the ranch to get to Thomas." She stumbled slightly over his real name, still unused to it. Thomas shook his head. "Reed's too calculating for that. There's something else." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Everyone tensed, exchanging wary glances. It was Sunday, and they weren't expecting visitors. Thomas moved to answer it, his body instinctively coiled for potential threat. Opening the door revealed not Reed or his men, but a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Clara Wilson, the doctor's daughter. Clara Wilson rose from his seat, surprise evident in his voice. What are you doing here? Looking for you, Papa. Clara stepped inside, nodding respectfully to the others. When you didn't come home for lunch, I got worried. Mrs. Turner at the telegraph office mentioned the urgent message to the Rayner Ranch. I'm fine, just helping with a situation here. Wilson gestured for his daughter to join them. You remember Miss Rayner and her mother and Mr. Blackwood? This is Michael Hayes visiting from Virginia. Clara greeted everyone politely, her gaze lingering perhaps a moment longer on Michael, who had risen at her entrance. I didn't mean to interrupt. Not at all, Martha assured her. We were just discussing a financial matter. Clara's expression shifted to one of concern. Is it about Colonel Reed's loan? The whole town's talking about how he's been buying up debts and foreclosing on properties. This was news to Thomas. What properties? 3 farms east of town so far, Clara said. All along Willow Creek. The Jenkinses lost their place last month, then the Morgans, and just last week, old Mr. Hargrove. Thomas exchanged a significant look with Wilson. All along the creek? Yes, Clara confirmed. People are saying he's planning to dam it up for some reason, though no one knows why. The pieces began to fall into place in Thomas's mind. The creek runs through the north corner of the Rayner property. And through all those other foreclosed properties, Kate added, catching his train of thought. What could he want with the water rights? Clara hesitated, then spoke again. There's something else you should know. I work at the milliner's shop 3 days a week, and Colonel Reed's office is just across the street. Last week I saw him meeting with some men I didn't recognize. Well-dressed city types. They had maps spread out on his desk. What kind of maps? Thomas asked. I couldn't see clearly, but they looked like survey maps of the county. They were very interested in the creek. I heard one of them mention the shipment and making sure it stays hidden. Thomas felt a surge of excitement. This was it, the missing piece. Reed's not interested in the land or the water, he said slowly. He's hiding something along the creek, something valuable. Or dangerous, Wilson added. During the war, there were rumors of Confederate gold being moved south as the Union advanced. Millions in coins and bullion that never reached Richmond. Michael leaned forward, his expression intense. I heard those stories too. Some said it was taken to Texas for safekeeping. If Reed knows where it is, Kate began, he'd need to control all the land it's hidden on, Thomas finished, to recover it quietly without anyone knowing. But why now? Martha asked. The war's been over for 4 years. Thomas considered this. Maybe he's only recently discovered its location. Or maybe he's been planning this for years, working his way into position at the bank buying up debts. Whatever the reason, Wilson said, if there's Confederate gold on your property, that would explain his urgency, and it might be our leverage. A renewed sense of purpose energized the group. If they could find proof of the gold, or even its location, they might have a way to force Reed to back down. We need to search along the creek, Thomas said decisively, every inch of it that runs through Rayner land. It's 5 miles of creek bed, Kate pointed out. We can't cover all of that before the deadline. We don't have to, Thomas replied. Reed's pattern of acquisitions suggests he knows approximately where to look. The properties he's already foreclosed on must narrow down the location. Clara spoke up again. I heard one of the men mention the old crossing. Does that mean anything to you? Kate's eyes widened. Willow Creek Crossing. It's an old ford where the stage road used to cross the creek right at the boundary between our land and what used to be the Jenkins farm. That's our starting point, Thomas said, standing up. We should go now while we still have daylight. I'll come too, Michael offered immediately. And me, Kate added. I know that part of the property better than anyone. Wilson nodded. Clara and I will return to town, see if we can learn anything more about Reed's plans or these mysterious visitors. Be careful, Thomas warned. Reed can't know we're on to him. Don't worry, Wilson assured him. I've been keeping secrets in this town for 40 years. No one will hear a word from us. As Wilson and Clara departed, Thomas, Kate, and Michael prepared for their expedition. They gathered tools that might be useful: shovels, picks a length of rope, and filled canteens with water. I'll stay with Mother, Kate said, in case anyone comes looking for us. Thomas nodded, appreciating Martha's clear-eyed understanding of the situation. We'll be back before dark, one way or another. The 3 set out on horseback, taking a roundabout route to avoid being spotted from the road. The creek lay to the north and west of the main house, cutting through a section of the property that was less cultivated, more wild. As they rode, Thomas found himself watching Kate. She sat her horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in the saddle, her face set with determination. Whatever happened, he realized she wouldn't give up without a fight. It was one of the things he had come to admire most about her. The old crossing came into view after about 30 minutes of riding. It was little more than a wide, shallow section of the creek where the banks sloped gently down to the water. Years ago, wagons and stagecoaches had forded the creek here, but the construction of a bridge 2 miles downstream had rendered the crossing obsolete. "This is it," Kate said, reining in her horse. "The boundary marker is just over there." She pointed to a weathered stone post set back from the creek bank. They dismounted, tying their horses to a stand of scrub oak. The creek itself was running low, typical for late spring before the summer rains. Its bed was visible in places, smooth stones polished by years of flowing water. "What exactly are we looking for?" Michael asked, surveying the area. "Anything that doesn't belong," Thomas replied. "Disturbed ground, unnatural formations markers." "Or that," Kate said, pointing to something half buried in the creek bank. Thomas followed her gaze to what appeared to be a rusted metal handle protruding from the earth. He moved closer, kneeling to examine it. Brushing away soil revealed the curved edge of what might be a metal door or hatch, heavily corroded and partially collapsed. "Help me dig," he said, reaching for one of the shovels they'd brought. Together they cleared away years of accumulated soil and debris, gradually exposing what appeared to be the entrance to a small bunker or cache built into the creek bank. The metal door was locked with a heavy padlock, also rusted, but still intact. "This has to be it," Michael said excitedly. "A hidden Confederate cache." Thomas studied the construction. "It's military, definitely. Corps of Engineers design." He pointed to a faint marking on the metal. "See that symbol? That's an Army Corps insignia." Kate leaned closer. "Can we open it?" Thomas examined the padlock. "Not without breaking it, and that might alert Reed if he's been checking on it." "So what do we do?" Michael asked. "We need proof of what's inside." Thomas thought for a moment. "There's a gap here where the door has warped. If we had something thin and flexible, we might be able to see inside." Michael pulled a small mirror from his pocket, the kind a gentleman might use for checking his appearance. "Will this help if we catch the light right?" Thomas took the mirror gratefully. "Perfect." He positioned the mirror at the gap, angling it to catch the sunlight and reflect it into the dark space beyond. For a moment he saw nothing. Then, as he adjusted the angle, a gleam of metal caught the light, row upon row of stacked objects. "I can see something," he reported. "Looks like boxes, metal boxes stacked along the back wall." "Gold?" Kate asked, her voice hushed with possibility. "Can't tell for sure," Thomas admitted. "But whatever it is, there's a lot of it, and someone went to great lengths to hide it here." The sound of a pistol being cocked froze them all in place. "Step away from there, now." They turned slowly to find Colonel Reed standing 20 feet away, pistol aimed steadily at them. Behind him stood two men, the city types Clara had mentioned, both also armed. "Colonel Reed," Kate straightened her voice, remarkably calm. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Reed's smile held no warmth. "Actually, Miss Rayner, as of noon today, this property belongs to the Stillwater Bank. Your time was up and payment was not received." "That's impossible," Kate protested. "We have until tomorrow." "Check the telegram again," Reed suggested. 48 hours from receipt of notice, which was sent Friday evening." The deadline passed at noon. Thomas silently cursed himself for not checking the exact timing. Reed had outmaneuvered them. "Now," Reed continued, "step away from the entrance. My associates and I have business to attend to." "Confederate gold," Thomas said flatly. "That's what you're after. That's why you've been buying up all the properties along the creek." Reed's expression flickered with surprise before settling back into smug confidence. "Very good, Mr. Blackwood. Or should I say Captain Thomas Blackwood, the famous long shot of the Confederate Army." Thomas felt Kate and Michael's surprised glances, but kept his attention on Reed. "You knew who I was from the beginning." "Of course I did. I never forget a face, especially not the face of the man who killed my brother." Reed's voice hardened. "Major Charles Reed, shot at 1,000 yards at Cold Harbor. Your last kill, I believe, before your capture." "It was war," Thomas said simply. "We were soldiers following orders." "Indeed, and my brother died a soldier's death. I've made my peace with that. Reed's casual tone belied the hatred in his eyes. But imagine my surprise when the infamous Longshot appeared in my town using a dead man's name, courting the very woman whose property I'd been working for years to acquire. So this isn't about revenge, Thomas realized. It's about the gold. It's about both, Reed admitted. The gold is my primary objective, 15 million in Confederate Treasury funds, entrusted to my care after Richmond fell. I was tasked with hiding it until the South could rise again. A fanatical light entered his eyes. That time is coming, Blackwood. The war never truly ended for some of us. The war is over, Reed, Thomas said firmly. The Confederacy lost. Lost a battle, perhaps. Not the war. Reed gestured with his pistol. Now enough talk. On your knees, all of you. Thomas assessed their situation rapidly. Reed and his men had the advantage of firearms and position. Any sudden move would likely get one or all of them killed. Do as he says, he murmured to Kate and Michael, slowly kneeling on the ground. They followed his lead, though he could see the reluctance in Kate's rigid posture. Wise choice, Reed smiled thinly. Jenkins, secure them. One of the men approached with rope binding their hands behind their backs. Thomas submitted to the binding, his mind racing for a way out of this situation. What are you planning to do with us? Kate demanded. You can't just make 3 people disappear. Can I? Reed raised an eyebrow. A tragic accident, perhaps. The creek may be low, but drowning still happens. Or maybe a cave-in while exploring an old mine shaft. The possibilities are numerous. Thomas felt a cold certainty that Reed meant every word. The man had spent years orchestrating this moment. He wouldn't let witnesses ruin his plans now. The gold doesn't belong to you, Michael said, his young face set with determination. It belongs to the United States government. The war is over. Reed laughed harshly. Idealistic like your brother. Robert was the same way, wasn't he? Look where it got him. Michael lunged forward despite his bound hands, only to be struck across the face with the butt of a pistol. He fell back, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. Michael, Kate cried, trying to move toward him. Stay where you are, Reed ordered him, or the boy gets worse than a scratch. Thomas caught Michael's eye, silently urging him to remain calm. Getting themselves killed wouldn't help anyone. What happens now? Thomas asked, playing for time. You can't move that much gold without being noticed. Already arranged, Reed replied smugly. A special train arrives tomorrow night. By morning, the gold will be on its way to our new headquarters in Mexico, and you 3 will be unfortunate victims of a tragic accident. People will look for us, Kate said. Dr. Wilson knows we're here. The good doctor is currently occupied with a medical emergency at the Sullivan farm. Reed smiled at their surprised expressions. Oh yes, I've been watching all of you. When Clara Wilson returned to town with her father, I knew something was happening. It was simple enough to create a distraction. Thomas felt their situation growing increasingly desperate. Reed had planned meticulously, accounting for every variable. Their only hope might be to stall until nightfall, when darkness might offer some advantage. Why the Rayner Ranch, he asked. Of all the properties to target, why this one? Reed considered him for a moment, as if deciding whether to indulge the question. John Rayner was a Union sympathizer in Confederate territory, he said finally. Did you know that Miss Rayner, your father, was a traitor to the South? Kate's expression remained defiant. My father believed in freedom and unity. He was no traitor. He provided information to Union forces throughout the war, Reed continued, as if she hadn't spoken, including information about Confederate treasury shipments. It's fitting that his land should house the very gold he tried to help the Union capture. Thomas processed this revelation. John Rayner, as a Union informant, explained much why James had felt comfortable joining the Northern Army, why the family had kept his service secret. There's something else you should know about John Rayner, Thomas said, an idea forming. He kept records, detailed records of every transaction, every visitor to this property. Reed frowned slightly. What are you talking about? Insurance, Thomas improvised. In case anything happened to him or his family. Letters, documents, maps all left with trusted friends and be opened in the event of suspicious circumstances. You're bluffing, Reed said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. Am I, Thomas met his gaze steadily. John Rayner knew the risks of being a Union sympathizer in Texas. You think he wouldn't have protected his family? Those documents detail everything, including your real identity and your mission with the Confederate Treasury. Kate picked up the thread seamlessly. It's true, Father never trusted the local authorities. He left evidence with friends in Austin, Chicago, even Washington. Reed's confidence wavered visibly. Even if that were true, it changes nothing. By the time anyone could act on such information, I'll be long gone. With what? Thomas pressed his advantage. 15 million in gold is heavy, Reed. You'll need wagons, men, time to excavate. More time than you have if federal authorities are already on their way. The colonel's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? A compromise, Thomas said. Let us go walk away from the Rayner property, and we won't reveal your location or identity to the authorities. You expect me to abandon 15 million in gold based on a bluff? Reed's laugh held no humor. I think not. Not all of it, Thomas clarified. Take what you can carry tonight. Enough to start a new life somewhere far from here. But leave the rest and leave us alive. Reed studied him for a long moment, calculation evident in his gaze. Thomas held his breath, knowing this desperate gambit was likely their only chance. The sound of approaching horses broke the tense standoff. Reed gestured sharply to his men, who raised their weapons toward the source of the noise. Were you expecting company, Miss Rayner? Reed asked coldly. Before Kate could answer, Dr. Wilson's voice called out from the trees. Kate, Thomas, are you there? Reed swore under his breath. Not a sound, he warned them, pressing his pistol against Thomas's temple. Or the doctor joins you in your tragic accident. Thomas met Kate's eyes, trying to convey a message without words. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding passing between them. As Wilson rode into view, Kate suddenly threw herself sideways, crashing into Reed's legs. The colonel staggered his pistol, discharging harmlessly into the air. Thomas rolled in the opposite direction, coming up hard against one of Reed's associates. Ambush! Wilson shouted, and suddenly the clearing erupted with activity as several riders burst from the trees, the sheriff and two deputies' guns drawn. In the chaos that followed, Thomas managed to work his bound hands beneath his legs, bringing them in front of him. He launched himself at the nearest of Reed's men, driving him to the ground despite his restrained state. Gunfire cracked through the air. Thomas heard Kate cry out and felt a moment of pure terror before seeing that she was still moving, still fighting. Michael had somehow gotten to his feet and was grappling with the second associate. The sheriff's commanding voice cut through the melee. Drop your weapons. Now, Reed, seeing his plan unraveling, made a desperate break for the horses. Thomas struggled to his feet, launching himself in pursuit despite his bound hands. He collided with Reed just as the colonel reached his mount, both men tumbling to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Reed fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, landing a solid punch to Thomas's jaw that sent stars exploding across his vision, but Thomas had survived. Andersonville had endured hardships Reed couldn't imagine. He absorbed the blow and pressed his attack, using his bound hands like a club to strike Reed across the face. The colonel went limp beneath him, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Thomas sat back, breathing heavily as the sheriff approached. Captain Blackwood, the lawman said, recognition in his voice. Never thought I'd see you again after Appomattox. Thomas looked up, surprised to recognize Colonel James Parker, now Sheriff Parker, who had been present at the surrender. Sheriff, your timing is impeccable. Thank Dr. Wilson, Parker replied, cutting Thomas's bonds with a pocket knife. He telegraphed me this morning with his suspicions about Reed. When his daughter reported armed men heading for the Rayner property, we rode out immediately. Thomas rubbed his chafed wrists, looking around the clearing. The deputies had subdued Reed's associates. Kate was being untied by Dr. Wilson while Michael sat on a fallen log, pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding cheek. The gold, Thomas said, gesturing toward the partially excavated bunker. It's Confederate treasury. Millions. Parker nodded grimly. We'll secure it, get word to the federal authorities. Reed's been suspected of Confederate activities for some time, but we never had proof until now. Thomas made his way to Kate, who was now free of her bonds. Are you hurt? She shook her head, her eyes bright with residual fear and relief. No, nothing serious. He touched a hand to his jaw, which was already beginning to swell. Michael. I'm fine, the young man called over, attempting a smile that turned into a wince. Though I think I'll have an impressive scar to show for today's adventure. Kate surprised Thomas by suddenly throwing her arms around him, holding him tightly. After a moment of shock, he returned the embrace, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. "I thought he was going to kill you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Takes more than Reed to finish me," Thomas murmured, though in truth he had believed their situation hopeless until Wilson's arrival. Kate pulled back slightly, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "Thomas," she said, testing his real name on her tongue, "it suits you better than Jonathan ever did." A small, painful hope bloomed in his chest. "Does it?" She nodded, a smile touching her lips despite the ordeal they'd just endured. "It's who you really are. And I think it's time you stopped living for the dead and started living for yourself." Her hand came up to touch his cheek gently. "For us." The simple declaration offered amid chaos and aftermath struck Thomas with the force of revelation. For so long, he had defined himself by promises to the dead, to Robert, to the real Jonathan Blackwood. He had carried their expectations, their hopes, using them as a shield against forming his own. But here was Kate, strong, resilient, clear-eyed Kate, offering him something he had thought forever beyond his reach, a future defined not by the past, but by possibility. "I'd like that," he said softly. "Very much." The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Federal agents arrived to secure the Confederate gold, all 15 million in coins, and bullion, one of the largest recoveries of its kind since the war's end. Colonel Reed and his associates were taken to Austin to face charges of conspiracy and attempted murder. Sheriff Parker, recognizing Thomas from their brief encounter at Appomattox, chose not to pursue any charges related to his wartime activities or his use of Jonathan Blackwood's identity. "The war's over, Captain," he had said simply. "Time we all move forward." The Rayner loan was invalidated when investigators discovered Reed had indeed forged the special provision. The bank, eager to distance itself from the scandal, offered generous terms for refinancing, which Kate accepted after careful consideration of the contract. Michael Hayes decided to stay on at the ranch, taking over the bunkhouse as his permanent residence. His cheerful nature and willingness to work had made him indispensable, and Thomas found himself increasingly grateful for the young man's presence, a living connection to Robert, a bridge between past and present. As for Thomas and Kate, their practical arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated when he first stepped off the train in Stillwater. They were married on a clear autumn day, a simple ceremony in the Rayner farmhouse with Dr. Wilson officiating and Martha beaming from her wheelchair. "Not how I imagined finding a husband," Kate had whispered to him during their first dance, her eyes twinkling with humor and something deeper. "Not how I imagined becoming one," Thomas had replied, still marveling at the turn his life had taken. Spring came again to Texas, bringing new life to the land. The Rayner Ranch, now officially the Blackwood Rayner Ranch, flourished under their combined care. Fields that had lain fallow now grew tall with corn and wheat. The cattle herd had nearly doubled. The house itself seemed to stand straighter, repairs completed with careful attention to detail. On a warm May morning, Thomas stood on the front porch watching as the first light touched the distant hills. Kate joined him, a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, passing him a cup. "Just thinking," he replied, his free arm automatically moving around her waist. "About," Thomas smiled, echoing their conversation from months ago. "How different things are than I expected." This time he didn't hesitate to continue. "When I came here, I was empty, just a collection of promises and regrets." He looked down at her, this woman who had somehow rebuilt him as surely as they had rebuilt the ranch together. "You filled those empty spaces, gave me something I never thought I'd have again." "What's that?" Kate asked softly. "A future I can believe in." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "We built it together, Thomas, and we'll keep building it." Her hand moved to her stomach, where the first subtle evidence of new life was just beginning to show. "All of us." Thomas covered her hand with his own, a profound sense of wonder washing over him at the thought of their child growing beneath his palm. Once he had been a taker of life, a dealer in death. Now he would be a father, a protector of something infinitely precious. "I was thinking," Kate said, her voice thoughtful, "if it's a boy, we might name him James or Robert." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And if it's a girl," Kate smiled up at him, "Hope, because that's what your coming here gave me even when I didn't know it. Hope for the future." As the sun rose higher, painting the Texas landscape in gold, Thomas Blackwood held his wife close, and allowed himself to fully embrace the life he had found not through the letters of a dead friend or a promise made in the chaos of battle, but through his own choices, his own heart. The ghosts of Cold Harbor would always be with him, but they no longer defined him. Here on this land with this woman, he had finally found his way home. And in the end, perhaps that had been Robert's true intent all along. Not merely that Thomas should find and care for Catherine Rayner, but that in doing so he might also find and care for himself. Letters, Thomas murmured against Kate's hair. It all began with letters and ended with love. She finished, turning in his arms to face him fully, which is as it should be. Their kiss, tender and unhurried, sealed not a promise to the dead, but a covenant with the living with each other, with the child to come, with a future stretching before them as vast and full of possibility as the Texas sky above.